I just think epics touch on meaning and purpose and are encyclopedic in what they teach. And that really helps a world in which we no longer see anything with the big picture. I find that those grand stories are very helpful in speaking to people who, by and large, have lost any sense of meaning and purpose in their lives and don't have any sense of a grand story of which they are a part. And so by reading these stories, it actually opens sensibilities in them or awakens them that they didn't even know that they had. I find that it's very, I don't see myself as a therapist, but it is therapeutic for people.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to my podcast. Thanks for tuning in. My guest today is Dr. Scott Masson. He's an associate professor of English literature at Tyndale University in Ontario and a recognized Mohawk status. He learned that later in life. He has an impressive academic background. He teaches classic literature, the epic stories, and we talked about that. We talked about the necessity for the humanities and the necessity for these stories that have a narrative that brings meaning to our lives. So I had a very nice conversation with him. I hope you enjoy it. Thanks for tuning in. So it's really nice of you to join me today on my podcast.
Delighted to be here.
Queenie, you said, I have a friend that you could talk to. And I said, okay.
That was enough, was it?
Yeah. Yep. Oh, yeah. I like to talk to people and I like to learn new things. And I like to learn new concepts about how to navigate the world. And I'm sure my audience will benefit from that. So I say yes.
I hope so.
Yeah. That's the aim, right?
Yep.
So could you tell me a little bit about your experience of discovering your Mohawk ancestry and how it impacts your understanding of identity?
Oh, wow. Okay, so you right to that. So it came, so it was a surprise to me because I did not know growing up that I was, because my mother did not know growing up that she was. And when my grandparents, her parents passed away, she found in their personal effects some sort of indications that not all is as she had thought it was. And her mother, before she passed, had said something cryptic to her as well. And that led her to,
why do you think it was so cryptic and so hidden?
Well, it's a good question, because you would have thought on like when she was passing, my grandmother, she might have just had that conversation, and she didn't actually broach it. And there'd be a lot of complexity to it, right? But she would, my mother hired a private investigator, and the private investigator found her birth mother because she saw her birth certificate, and that led to further revelations and so forth. But even then, to make it even more complicated, her birth mother would not tell her who her actual father was.
I wonder how common that is. You know, with all the confusion.
I don't think it's uncommon. It may not be standard, but it's probably more common than we would like to think. That's for sure. But by that time, I was probably 27. So in terms of forming my own identity, at that point, you're an adult. I was studying I think I just moved to England at that point from studying in Germany. So, about to undergo a master's degree, something like that. I think that was roughly around the time. So I knew who I was, more or less, and for better or for worse. And finding it was sort of amusing to me.
Did it make sense?
No.
No, huh?
Well, it did, in the sense that my mother looks sort of native.
Okay.
And some features, and but so did her father. or the man I thought was her father, who was actually her adopted father. And so I just assumed that there was some sort of, I mean, many people in Canada of a certain generation have at least some Indigenous connections in the
Right.
family. And so I just thought that he was in some way. And I'll never know what exactly the reason was why they didn't tell her, and we didn't find out. But her birth mother gave her away, didn't, to my knowledge, tell her why she had. It just leads to then speculation. Then when you hear more about the history of the family, you can start to maybe guess, but again, you're just guessing. So I think an aunt of hers had 12 children. Remember, this is Mohawk, and Upper Mohawk, so Brantford area. And by that point, the residential schools, of which the Mohawk Institute was the largest in Canada, I think, had become compulsory. As in, they mandatory, if you have children and you are on the reserve, your children go to school residentially. In other words, you lose your children. And she had 12 children, and all of them had been taken from her.
Oh,
and she died at 40. She died at 41, and probably of a broken heart.
Yeah, really.
And the boys, the boys had not wanted to go. They were running away. There was all sorts of issues. So I've heard bits about that. Is that a factor in it? I have no idea at that point.
Right. Well, you know, we're my husband and I are members of an Indigenous family on the BC coast, off the island, Vancouver Island, the Kwakwaka'wakw tribe, and Charles Joseph is his name, and he's a carver, and we're friends with him. And he asked if we could be part of his family. And it's complicated. There was a lot of negotiation and transactions that had gone on previously for him to come to that conclusion. But he had been in the hospital with measles, mumps, rubella, you know, when he was a little kid, all alone in an oxygen tank with nothing in the room. So he had nothing to look. It was just white, institutional, and little kids from the hospital used to come and pile up books to give him something to play with, you know, like he was alone. But when he got out and he was better, he was waiting for his grandparents to come in their boat and pick him up. But the residential school bus came first, and off he went.
Can you imagine? I mean, this is it's just terrible, and it's a tragedy on a personal scale for so many people in Canada. But it's an ongoing experiment from the time of the Enlightenment. What will happen to children under certain conditions? Let's
what's
try and do
happening
this.
now. Look what's happening now, right?
Sure.
Yeah,
right,
it
right.
never changes. It never changes. It's always an experiment on the vulnerable, because the powerful are secure.
So there's, and I can't remember if it was which emperor it was, but I think it was one of the emperors of the 18th century decided to find out which of the languages children would speak, which language children would speak if they had no influences upon them whatsoever. What would be the native language of children just from birth? And so they brought them up without any sort of human interaction, and the children all died. They didn't reach an age when they could speak, but the purpose of the experiment was just to find what is the actual Ur language of the human race. And
that's
there's
a
all
brutal
these other
experiment.
but again, and so let's find out. The way we'll find out is we'll do this.
Right. Yeah. No.
No. But so they just bracket out that this is a human being. In the interest of science, we'll do this experiment and see what happens.
And I would say, you know, Charles Joseph's family, and he has a number of children. He's about the same age as us. His life is filled with crisis.
Yeah.
His son, I think, just died a couple of weeks ago. A grown son. You know, and we're part of his family, though, so we can be of support.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of reconciliation that works. Is you have to get down there in the community and be a part of it, and suffer with them, and bring them up with you and with your family. And
Yeah.
it's a complicated problem, and we don't understand how to deal with it.
Well, right. And what we do, we've never discussed this, but we probably agree that the means of reconciliation is not going to be at the macro level of the state. That's not, reconciliation can happen in terms of a peace treaty being struck between two governments, but that's not a way to reconcile people.
No, if we have an argument, you and I, that can't be decided up somewhere else. It's between you and I.
It is. And if anybody else interferes with that, they're actually going to force an agreement of sorts on us, but we're not actually going to be reconciled. And
no,
I mean, that's
right.
What's going on. Your husband's undergoing this sort of forced reconciliation for his, right? It's just that same sort of thing. And, except the difference is you don't even know who the people who are complaining are, what their grievances actually are, because it's concealed. It's just, the whole thing is bizarre.
But I can imagine that your mother, so this was your mother's mother, right?
Yes.
She was adopted. Your mother's mother was adopted.
No. My mother was adopted. My mother's mother stayed on the reserve. Right.
But she never shared any of that with you.
Not with me, but with my mother she did. But she did not tell her who her father was.
Yeah. Well, I can imagine it was complicated.
I mean, any number of possibilities are there then. Is it somebody important, or is it,
right,
something shameful?
Right. And anything like that. When my grandmother died at 98, she lived to be a very long time. And she was very close with her, as were my sisters, very close. And we went to visit her all the time in the nursing home. Her sister was in the room next door. They were all very long-lived Polish people.
Right.
And before she died, she said, one time I came home from work. She was a nurse. She came home to the farm, and my mom wasn't in the house. She was back in the woods somewhere. And then my grandmother said, you have to protect the children. And so I know that something happened to my mom, but I don't know what it was. And it was a secret right to my grandma's dying days. So, people do keep secrets.
They do.
Yeah, they do. And it's a lack of trust between, we have to be more supportive of each other.
Yes, but it's also an awareness that some things will never be reconciled with in this life because people are not trustworthy enough to be able to deal with that. They know that with that sort of very sensitive information, worse things can be done by opening up the box. Worse things can happen.
Or they're afraid of what may happen.
They're afraid of what can happen because worse things could happen and ensue. So the trust levels really do have to be there, as you said.
Yeah. When Jordan and I argue, we argue right down to the core, even though it's difficult. And then we find out what it is in the end. And then you have a cry and it's over and you don't fight about that anymore. It's a brutal process, but in the end, it's reconciliation. There has to be truth. You have to find the truth.
Yeah, I agree.
So you're a professor.
Yes. You
teach Christian humanism?
I'm an English literature is my sort of, that's my degree, and I teach English literature, but I try to
bring it into the story.
Well, that my personal story. No, I don't bring that in. I bring it in.
I mean more like Christian humanism. You bring that into your practice.
Because when we're reading stories, we are reading about people and their experiences, of course, and it's not just it's a story. It's an artfully told story that is told in such a manner as to play on the reader's sympathies, empathies, sense of the meaning and purpose of life. The best stories really evoke large thoughts. And so I love teaching the epic, because the epic talks about the gods and the underworld and the afterlife. And there's young and there's old, there's friends, there's enemies, there's a hero and there are villains, and they're all thrown into an encyclopedic work. And I find that those grand stories are very helpful in speaking to people who, by and large, have lost any sense of meaning and purpose in their lives and don't have any sense of a grand story of which they are a part. Their lives seem trite, meaningless. They feel uncared for. And so by reading these stories, it actually opens sensibilities in them or awakens them that they didn't even know that they had. And then having done that, even with let's say a pagan epic like from Homer, you can talk about, and I as a Christian will say, let's talk about this in the context of the God of heaven and earth, the Lord Jesus Christ. Let's talk about the significance of his earthly life and his crucifixion and his resurrection and his ascension and how that fits in with a providential scheme in history, and how we who bear his image are connected to that story by virtue of the fact that we bear that image. And that's, there are just so many different layers there that it starts to become a rich tapestry of meaning where stories interact with other stories and also with us, the readers. And I find that it's very, I don't see myself as a therapist, but it is therapeutic for people.
So that's interesting. So I know that when they don't have the transcendent, the order that is good in the center, and they are fragmented, they're people on the periphery have come to the middle and they're fragmented and they're trying to find what power and blame and all these other things, and it won't end well. So it does make them feel unmoored and directionless. How do you speak about these stories to bring someone like that to an understanding that actually their narrative that they are living, say the Marxist narrative that they are living, or the postmodern narrative that they're living, is incomplete? How do you manage that?
So it's helpful to have a base of comparison. And so I start with worldviews that assumed some sort of theism, whether it's the polytheism of the Greeks and the Romans, or the theism of the Christians, or whatever, some sort of theistic worldview in which there is meaning and purpose and order. And I find that once I've set that backdrop of here's how another world looks at these issues, it's a very different way than the way we start. They start from a different point. But let's live in their world for a little while, put aside our own biases and misconceptions, preconceptions, whatever. We'll just set those to one side. Just let's get into this story and try and see things the way that they're seeing things for a while. And with that, then you come back to your own world and say, well, how do we look at that? And what sort of stories do we tell about ourselves? Now, one of them is the Marxist narrative, yes. But the one that precedes the Marxist narrative is the narrative of, and this is a feature of Western literature from the 19th century onward, is the vantage point of the orphan. The orphans are the heroes of the stories that we read about. And when I say the orphan, I'm not just saying as a feature of modern writing. It's almost the only feature of modern heroism.
Tom Sawyer? Would Tom Sawyer be a...
You can start with Charles Dickens, where his heroes are all orphans. You could look at Anne of Green Gables. You could read Tom Sawyer. You could read the works by the Romantic poets, which is my area of expertise. You could move into the 20th century and all the superhero fiction novels are orphans. James Bond is an orphan. Harry Potter's an orphan.
Superman.
Yeah, Superman, among all the superheroes are orphans. And so after a while you start to say, well, okay, I didn't actually notice that before. And obviously that's not insignificant. And then the question is, why on earth would the state of an orphan be the model of heroism being presented to us as the
Christ,
standard, right?
Christ
is no orphan.
Well, when he comes back to earth, he's forevermore, and his mother is now in heaven, and so is his father. So but he is still here and eternal. Is he an orphan?
Christ is not an orphan. First of all, in terms of his own nature, he has the triune nature of God.
Yes.
Right? So he's an eternal.
I just wonder if they're seeing a relationship, or if they're
I don't think so.
Don't even know they're searching for that. No?
Well, the experiment with autonomy, it's really autonomy that leads to the idea of an orphan as the ideal human being. Because the autonomy is the sort of the Enlightenment ideal for human nature. So Immanuel Kant, in his it's a little treatise called What is Enlightenment? He talks about the emancipation of the self from the shackles, self-imposed shackles or tutelage of the past. So we're going to free ourselves from the past under the Latin motto, sapere aude, dare to know. So we will not live in the light of what the church has taught us, in light of what our parents have taught us, in light of what our culture has taught us. We're going to dare to know, and we're going to create our own identity going forward. Nobody's going to give us our identity. We're going to create our own identity. We're going to fashion ourselves from nothing, as if we were a blank slate. And an orphan is the one state of human affairs where that seems at least vaguely plausible, because nobody is directing you. You're left to your own devices to some degree. And then a genre called the Bildungsroman emerges at this time, where the character basically has to develop him or herself, and we follow the development of the character as he fashions his own identity. And usually they don't then look outside themselves. They don't look to church doctrine. They don't look to cultural norms. They look within themselves. And they create their own identity out of what seems best to them. And usually the heroes that we'll take Harry Potter because it's best known in today. The wise figure of Dumbledore at the end of the day, when Harry Potter wants an answer to a problem, what to do, he's told, well, you have to look within yourself. Only you are going to know, Harry, what the right thing is to do. I can't tell you. He's the sage, venerable character that runs the whole of Hogwarts and seemingly, defies the powers of darkness, but he can't tell Harry Potter what to do next. It's as if Harry's the only one who can tell us what to do, when to do, how to do it. He's going to figure it out along the way. That's the model for us. When people are given that as the primary mode by which we're going to understand the world around us, that's a heroic posture that we see that Harry's presenting us, or Peter Parker or Superman. That's the primary way. Then we're going to think, well, I have to follow that, because that's what people do when they read stories. They emulate their heroes. So they don't say, in this given situation, I'm going to ask my parents, or let me ask a figure in authority, or what do the ancients say? What do the wise people of years past say about this? They say, no, I've got to figure this out for myself. And I've got to look within my own self and make it make sense. And if it doesn't make sense, which it usually doesn't, then they just feel conflicted and defeated and broken and bruised, and they can't lift themselves up, quite frankly. But again, they're trapped in the paradigm of the orphan, which they have applied to themselves, even though there are very few of us today that are orphans, relatively speaking. And we certainly, historically speaking, again, would not regard an orphan as somebody to look up to. We would look at an orphan as somebody to pity. We're supposed to look after widows and orphans. We're not to look up to them as our role models for how to behave or to govern our own lives. But now we do.
Yeah,
and of course,
that's
when you're in that state, then the government has to come in to help you.
Right. And so the government is the benevolent father.
Yeah.
Right.
Or we talk about the nanny state, but it's the benevolent. That's correct. And invariably you find people from broken families will gravitate towards helping them because they simply can't help themselves. They have to have a hand up from who, now the sugar daddy or the nanny state, however you want to present it, but they need help because they can't do it on their own, even though they have been brought up to think that they have to do it on their own.
Right. Yes, it's a vicious circle. Huh? So first of all, they are orphans, or
They break their own identity. They break their own
orphan
identity.
themselves, right?
Yes.
They orphan themselves. So then they're looking for the next right thing to do, but from their own volition, not getting guidance from above for the next right step, but from themselves for the next right step. And that never is as good as God, if you're listening to the will of God and taking your next right step, because then you're informed from what is old and true, and the rules and the tradition that's been over and over and over and over. So it's pretty solid. It's solid. They're not taking any of that information.
Also, they regard, so they start from a faulty presupposition about their own human nature, and that is that they are autonomous. There's no law that governs them. There's no rules. There's no identity. So the primary human unit is not the family. It is the solitary, isolated individual. That's it. And with that misconception, then other ills follow that. But it begins with a false conception of who they are in terms of their identity. And that's why I say that it's really important to recover the significance of human personhood, which we get by understanding that we bear the image of God. It says that in Genesis 1:26 and 27. And that means that we are relating. If we want to know who we are, we have to know who God is and who we are in relation to him. And who we are in relation to him, we see when he sends his son to reconcile us to God for original sin, etc. And there is already a pre-existing relationship which governs us, even though we may not have even realized it before. God relates to us. He cares for us. He sent his son to die for us. He sent his son so that we would know that he knows what it's like to be a human being as well. All those things. Like that's a big recovery of a big picture, and also a different paradigm for human identity. Once you've started down that path, you will find that first of all, it's more realistic in terms of its application, but it's also more therapeutic. Definitely more so. God's not the great absence. He is the omnipresent. He's there all the time.
Yes, I was teaching my little niece, she's 7, the rosary the other day. Just introduced her to the rosary. She knew what it was already, but she didn't know how to pray it. So I was just showing her how. And I got to say to her, Mother Mary is your eternal mother. She's always been there. She's with you now, and she will always be with you no matter what. And your eternal Father, who's always been there, is with you now and will always be with you. And he will always be there to support you. And I thought, isn't that wonderful to be able to offer that to a 7-year-old girl who's dealing with life and maybe divorce or death in the family or whatever it is, that you have this eternal mother and father that you can depend on. I thought, wow, I would have loved to hear that story when I was little.
It provides relational comfort for sure.
Oh my goodness. And courage. Gives you courage and all kinds of things that you don't have otherwise, because it's too much for us alone.
It is. It's a weight that you're not meant to bear or are able to bear. There's nothing there. I mean, we're going to differ. I'm not Catholic in my theology. I'm not going to see Mary as the mother of God in the same way. She's obviously the mother of God, but I won't see her in that sense. But I will see the human nature of Christ as being the mediator between God and man, who is both God and man, and whom I can pray to directly and know that God himself hears immediately all of my concerns as a man. Or if I were a woman, it would be no different, knows what it's like to suffer abuse, want, hunger, abandonment, and ultimately something that I will never experience actually in the same way, but the absolute wrath of God. God doesn't ever abandon me in the way in which he abandoned Jesus. So this is the thing about Christ's experience that does not match up with my experience. But I will never be God-forsaken because he was God-forsaken. And so anybody matter how terrible their experience is, it's not as bad as Jesus because he bore the sins of the whole world upon his shoulders and the wrath of God. And even if I feel that nobody cares for me, that's my feeling. That isn't the reality. Whereas there it is the reality. Jesus cries out from the cross, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Because he was God forsaken, we are never going to be. If we have faith in him, we will never be in that situation.
Right, as long as we're consistently faithful, no matter what, even when we're in difficult places, if we keep that faith.
Yes, or even if we don't, because his hold on us.
Right, even if we don't.
Because his hold on us is far stronger than ours on him.
Yes, as we've seen in the Michelangelo painting, where God is reaching out with all of his might, and Adam is kind of limp-wristed and not exactly trying very hard.
It's a good portrait of the Imago Dei in a sense. I mean, how do you present that in painting? But that's what he's trying to do. Yes.
And what is that? I don't know what that is.
Oh, the Imago Dei?
Yes.
Well, the image of God. So it's a good portrait of the image of God.
That's Latin for
yes,
the image
sorry.
of God. Yeah. No, I get it.
Yes. Sorry, I get too much academic.
I go to a friend. It's okay. That's okay. I live with an academic, so I understand that I'm not going to understand everything. I go to a Catholic church. I've been going to a Catholic church that bring a little bit of Latin into some of the prayers, and so I'm looking forward to learning the Latin through that. Yeah, because I never studied Latin. I didn't study it. Unfortunately, it wasn't. I studied sciences, actually. I stayed away from the arts because I could see the postmodernism and I wanted to stay away from it.
It was evident even when we studied, right? It's already there.
Yeah, 1983. Yeah. Yeah. But then I decided when I was older that I needed to actually understand it all. That was a mistake to avoid it, that I need to understand it all. Otherwise, I can't know what I'm up against when I see it.
Yeah, I sort of blundered my way into it but first year English, which I just, what am I going to take as a fifth course? Well, I'll take English. And it pulled me in. And then I thought, there's so much here that I want more of this. It was a big surprise to me.
And now you've started your own Discovery Institute collaboration.
Yeah, the Discovery. It's a think tank based in Seattle, Washington. It's sort of Christianity and science, and it engages thoughtfully on all sorts of big topic issues in relation to science that are not my area of expertise. But it's largely the point that makes me most interested is the sort of, and the overlap between us is the awareness of the malign effects of scientism on our culture. So trusting the scientists to lead science, and where it leads to terrible inhumanity. And so they'll present it in terms of intelligent design as a better way of understanding science than the dominant mode of explanation, which has largely been evolutionary for about 150 years. And they say evolutionary doesn't really make a lot of sense and is sort of falling apart around us. But it's not, right? It's been used and this is how science works. You come up with a theory that explains the reality until a new theory comes along which explains it better, and at which point there's a period where there's a conflict between the two, and then eventually a new theory which explains things better is accepted by everybody. And I think that's...
So you said this institute is Christianity and science together, which is unusual.
I don't think they have to be explicitly Christians. Some of them are, some of them will be.
Maybe religion and science.
And science, yes, yeah. So, I've been working with them on creating some humanities type courses. And that's a very recent thing, though.
I see.
Yeah.
I see. And you're bringing these epic stories. Yes?
I am, because
Okay.
I again, for the reason I said at the outset, I just think epics touch on meaning and purpose, and are encyclopedic in what they teach, and that really helps a world in which we no longer see anything with the big picture. We don't. And so being drawn into a big picture story, and then being able to trace the epic as a genre through generations, from the Greeks to the Romans and on through the Christian era to Dante and to Milton. And you're reading the great works of Western literature there, but you're also seeing the development of our understanding of the world, our understanding of human nature. All sorts of big pictures arise out of it. And so then it becomes a really, not just a class in literature, it's a class in discovering what a human being is, and what the big questions are in life. Because TV media does not really delve into big questions at all. I mean, again, Jordan, your husband, is interested in those sorts of things, but he's an unusual psychologist in that respect, I think.
Mm-hmm.
There are some in that, that discipline that will be interested in, the study of meaning, Viktor Frankl, that sort of realm.
John Vervaeke at U of T. John Vervaeke, he looks deeply at meaning.
Yes, so that's a bigger and broader and richer. But most psychologists are not interested in those sorts of things. They're,
And do you think that's since the Enlightenment, we've come from the Enlightenment to where we are now, and it's more obvious now. It's more obvious now, the separation that was made in the Enlightenment between what was theological and what was material.
Yeah, I think the failures of the Enlightenment are now evident around us.
Yes.
At first, they were objected to by some who were far-seeing and said, no, this is a real mistake, and resisted it strongly. But it was not, it was a minor outcry against that paradigm shift. Or if it was not minor, the Enlightenment perspective is the one that won that battle.
Right.
And now we can see the consequences of that victory are terrible. And we're still living with that. We're in between ages now. Some say we're in the new dark ages, and I think I find myself agreeing with them in many ways.
Well, I was listening to the Canadian news over the last little while, and all the churches that are burning.
Yeah.
And then there was a building in Montreal that was burned, and they found the perpetrators within a few days.
I didn't know that.
When I hear about these burning churches, I don't hear anybody being caught.
No.
And so what's that? What is that? That's, like you said, end of times type of...
It's a bit of Marxism there. Like you mentioned Marxism, that's a feature of Marxism, certainly in Russia, which I visited in the early 2000s. I was on a Christianity and literature conference I was there in Moscow for a week. I spoke at various monasteries and so forth as well. They told me the history of the church as in orthodoxy under the communists, and basically some of them were just burnt, but others were used as latrines, and they were desecrated. I mean, there's a explicit hostility towards any vestige of Christianity, and the priests were not only defrocked and humiliated and sent to camps, but same sort of thing is happening here, I think.
I went to Estonia into a church that had been used as a marketplace, just like from the Bible.
Yep.
Under the communists, it was just a marketplace, and they've reconditioned it. And because it's quite a building, Estonia was beautiful and very close to Russia. I've never been in Russia yet.
Okay. Yeah, and I haven't been to Estonia, but I was in Moscow. But again, this happened since the French Revolution, and the French revolutionaries did the same thing to the French Catholic churches. They would just rededicate them to the goddess of reason. That happened repeatedly, and including Notre Dame, I believe, right there in Paris, was just, we're going to dedicate to a new god, and the god is the god of reason. And, and not long after that happens, the reign of terror begins. So having killed off God we're going to now move to people. That's the alarming thing about what's happening with the burning of churches, which is already a cultural atrocity, cultural vandalism. We know that it has a human corollary, that people are also going to be attacked, and we could say that they already are there, or the image of God is being attacked in our abortion and euthanasia policies. I think that's already
the trans butchery
and the trans, like, again, and now we're going to wrap that in the layer of, again, the orphan identifying himself and creating his own identity, and the state coming in and saying, we're going to protect you from the people that are going to deny your identity. We really are behind you here. And I think, no, you're not. You don't know what a human being is, and you don't want anyone to be able to assert anything that is going to contradict the all-weaning power of the state to determine our identity from cradle to grave. That's what you want. And this, you're going to demonstrate it in abortion right before we see the baby emerge in the world, to euthanasia, to everything in between.
When I was a child growing up, abortion was, I grew up, I was born in 1961. So abortion was a fairly new concept. It was there, but it was rare. Like they said, it was supposed to be rare. It's not rare anymore.
Oh gosh,
not a bit. And they're taking babies from the third trimester. Are you absolutely? Well, they're crazy.
Yeah, and if they can't do that and it's too late, they let them die on the table.
And don't nurture them.
They don't nurture them. They don't kill them. They just don't provide care.
There was a nurse when mothers died in childbirth, the babies used to die, even if you fed them.
Sure.
But then there was this German nurse who used to carry them around on her hip, and the babies began to live.
Because they were held.
Because they were held, because they were nurtured, because they were close body-to-body contact, which is what they need. And even little rat pups will die without that. If a rat pup is born and you take it away from your mother, if you rub it with a pencil eraser, it'll be okay. But if you don't, it'll die. Like they need, I think the system needs to be touched and manipulated for consciousness to erupt.
It says something about human nature in relation to love, doesn't it? And also, and also embodiedness.
Well, that's about serving your neighbor, isn't it? Is to be
all those
close.
Things.
Yeah.
Yes, to again, to be a human is not only to have your own certain properties about you, capacity for reason, whatever, but also to be related to other human beings. That's essentially a part of being a human.
Yeah, well, if you're thinking about yourself all the time, Jordan would tell me that was a recipe for depression and anxiety, because you become overly obsessed with yourself. As soon as you look outside yourself and see what you can do for another, all of that will disappear.
Yeah, and he's obviously knows better than I, but I can observe that in a classroom setting. Yeah, in a classroom setting, if I notice that somebody's moving towards the back of the lecture hall, they started at the front, and their faces were, they were attentive, and they're withdrawing, and they're not just withdrawing from me. You'll also see that they don't engage with the other students. Then I know trouble's coming.
Oh yeah.
It's just they're retreating within themselves for whatever reason. I don't know the reason. I just see what's happening, and I know there's a crisis already happening before it's even broken out. You can notice that just by observing behavior.
Yes, that's for sure.
Yeah, self-isolating behavior.
Yeah, that's right. And I know that when you grow up in dysfunction, you either act out or isolate.
Yep.
Because kids attention is what they want, and they'll turn themselves into knots. Doesn't matter what they have to do to get attention. And so then you learn these weird behaviors, and one of them is isolation.
Yep.
Yeah.
Out of shame, or even the model of, again, we talked about the orphan. I'm going to solve this and be the hero of my own story.
Yeah.
I can't ask for help.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not a good message.
It's not a good message.
You know what I did when I was 18 and I left home? I told my parents I was never coming home again because I was 18. I thought I knew what I was doing and I didn't understand them. So I was going to leave home and I was going to figure out my life, just like you're saying, right?
But you were told to do that in songs,
I
cultural things.
know,
That's the way.
I know. But then later in life, when I had an illness, I went through surgery and I came out before I even told my family. But I only realized that recently when I realized that I'd made an inner vow of never coming home, that I separated myself from my family. And so then my behavior changed. And I actually isolated myself from them. And so I've had to reconcile myself to them.
So you hurt yourself by trying to remove yourself from any influence there.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's pretty common now. Because we're told that we can do that kind of thing and that we're better off even.
And maybe we should do it and nobody can tell you what to do and right.
Yeah. So what do you find from fall when the students come in and then the spring when they leave and they've been through your class all year long? And you have them write papers, I imagine.
Yes, I do. Yeah, I do the same means of assessment that I had when I went through undergrad. I think that's very unusual, but I get them to write essays, lots of essays. Mm-hmm. I think as a pedagogical tool, it's extremely helpful. What do I notice? Mm-hmm. First year is a bit of I did very badly at first year university, first of all. I struggled.
Yeah, well, I couldn't even figure out what to study. I mean, I just chose some subjects and I was like, that all looks interesting. I don't know what to study.
Yeah. So first year, it's harder to say as a general trend because the differences amongst them is really vast. So some of them will drop out, although not that many at my institution, which is a small Christian liberal arts.
That's good. That's good.
It's very good. Yeah.
What is the dropout rate?
Oh, I think it's definitely below 10%.
Huh. Do you have a code of honor?
We have a theological statement. We have a lifestyle policy.
And that's what the students are told when they come there?
It used to be the case that they were required to conform to all that. Once the B.Ed program began at Tyndale, and this began after I was there, we were required by the government in order to get the B.Ed credentialing to have open enrollment, in which case if students were not Christians and were applying, then they would say, well, it's not fair for you to require of us that you insist that we act like Christians in this university because we're not, and you're violating our human rights. So we no longer require it of students even in the non-B.Ed programs. The whole university now doesn't require it even of Christian students. It's more of an aspirational goal. You should try and be respectful of others who do want to live like in conformity with that. But it used to be required for not just faculty, but staff and students. Now it's a little bit more mixed. Mm-hmm. But the substance of a Christian community, I still think is a part of it, and it's the dominant force. Mm-hmm. And I think that gives it a sense of order and purpose that wouldn't have been there and isn't there in the public universities. Right.
So the kids stick with it.
They do by and large, and even if they don't agree with it, they benefit from it. They think that it is and it's. But they'll put it, even if they don't want to put it positively, they'll say, but it's better than that. Right. It's better than going to York. It's better than going to U of T.
Right.
They'll put it that way. And some people, again, will transfer in for that very purpose. They'll say, I felt lost and I felt like I was irrelevant. I was just a number. And there was all sorts of chaos. And here there's an order. Even if I don't agree with it, I prefer order to chaos.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's a message for today's culture. That's for sure.
For sure. Yeah. Order is a good thing. Yeah. So within the first year students, though, some of them begin on fire and then they sort of lose their way. Although the most part, I don't feel like I lose them, but they get caught up in all sorts of things. Things can happen in first year, but the ones that I love teaching first year, first of all, because I get the opportunity to catch them with their minds still open to being open. It won't take long before that will change, but you can get them early on and you can make them enthusiastic about the great issues that I think the literature talks about. They are awakened to something that they didn't even know existed. And it draws them into the life of the mind in a way that they would never have imagined themselves doing. They just didn't know that those sorts of questions could even be asked, let alone that there are really good, meaningful answers that they can apply to themselves. So I like to see
it's
people...
even practical.
Very practical, yeah. And I try and make it practical for them as well. So I'll talk about the literature. I'll talk about Christian doctrine, what the Bible says here. I'm going to say, but how about you? How does this apply to you? And I'll try and do that.
That's
and every
perfect,
once in a while, halfway through the semester,
you have to have, the axis of everyday life and then the axis of theology, but it has to touch earth and heaven. And so when you bring it down to the practical, that makes that connection. Yeah. That's very smart. That's very smart.
It's a pedagogical device, but it allows, but you know what? The more you do that, the more they are interested in things that seem a little bit too hard. It's a little bit too much hard work for me to understand the ancient Greeks. But if you're going to tell me that this is so important that you can apply it directly to me and I can see the value in that, then I'm going to want to spend more time outside of my own little selfish world and in a very different world.
Yeah.
And so I can see heads lift up and people starting to be enthusiastic. It's a wonderful thing.
Oh yeah, that sounds exciting. It makes me want to take the course. Right
Welcome
now.
To.
Yeah, and I think by the time I'm 65, I can take it free.
Probably.
Well, I don't know if that exists anymore. It used to exist.
Well, I'm at a private university, so I have no idea what its
that might be different.
That
might just be for public universities. Anyway, It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, but that's one of the policies that it was something that retired people could look forward to.
Yeah. And I wish more people would take that opportunity and avail themselves of that rather than retiring to the golf course or whatever one does.
Yeah. No, we went out to, where did we go? We went out to a small university outside of Toronto. I can't remember the name of it. Guelph University. And we were there, I don't know what for, but we got a tour of everything and we found out how much it was and stuff. And we thought we could stay here as retired people and live in the dorm and go to university free. That would be a lot better than any other, and then an old folks home or assisted living or something. You could just come here and they cook for you. It's just like, okay, that's a possibility.
I don't know if I'd want to do that now, quite frankly, but
not now, but before. This was probably 2010 that we thought about this. Right. It was a long time ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the community has benefits.
Yeah, that's right. So how do you keep a balance between your professional life? You sound like you have a very strong professional life and your personal life, like family and.
How do I keep a balance? Do I keep a balance?
Do you keep a balance? Okay.
It's very difficult in Toronto, as you know. I live in Toronto like you. I mean, I realize that you now travel a fair bit and so forth, but Toronto has become a very difficult place to live a balanced life. The pressures on the family are enormous. The just the commuting around is stressful, long, and increasingly ill-tempered. The city planners seem to be intent on making it more frustrating and more difficult, and at the same time do it in the name of helping us and protecting us and, involving themselves in every area of our lives, which really they'd be best staying out of.
Right,
But
exactly. Yeah,
they
bike
insist,
lanes have taken over the streets.
yeah, like the bike lanes. I mean, it's just a small example, but it's one that really affects an enormous number of people. And I like biking,
Me too.
but
Hmm.
but for the majority of the people in the area, they're never going to ride bikes. They can't. They won't. If you have a family, it's impractical. It's not. And then the conditions of winter, like it's an absurd policy.
Well, it's the same thing with public transportation. If you
Same
have to
thing.
be somewhere at 9 in the morning and the bus doesn't come and then you're late, well, you can't take that. If you really have to be there, you have to drive.
You have to. That's
Yeah,
right.
and so they're trying to limit our accessibility to our cars.
Yes, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah,
All in the name of the managed society, build back better, whatever you want to say.
yeah,
Agenda
that's right.
2030, all that stuff.
Yeah.
It's a policy you can see being played out all across the developed world.
Oh yeah, the UK. I think it's 30-minute cities. Yeah, it's
Yep.
just.
Oh, that's here as well, but it's just not.
Oh, it is, eh?
Oh, it's here.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I'm sure it is. Oh well,
But
there's a lot of work to be done.
but the UK is further down that road. I realized that when I was studying there, the cameras on the street corners popped up even during the Gulf War. In the early 90s, I saw them coming up during the war in Iraq, Bush and Blair and so forth. Suddenly there were cameras up on every corner, and I thought,
Now, do you think these were speed cameras
No,
or
no.
surveillance cameras?
They're surveillance.
Oh yeah,
Yep.
yeah. No, we should
No
fight
doubt.
against that.
Yeah.
Not let that happen.
There was
I'm
not a peep.
I'm against that.
Me too. But again, I mean, I guess I have a British passport, but I thought it's not my place to be making a big fuss about this. And why isn't anybody else, however? What's going on here in the name of protecting us? It was really Orwellian.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting. We're in a climate that's very pre-war climate.
Yeah. And the only thing that's changed is the technology has become more powerful and intrusive.
Yeah, well, the Tower of Babel is growing.
Yes. Yep. Indeed.
Yeah, because they have no. It's material. It's completely material.
Yep. Have you ever? You probably haven't read this because it's little read, but there's a book by C.S. Lewis in a science fiction trilogy. The whole trilogy I recommend, but the third installment is called That Hideous Strength, and it cites right at the beginning of the book a line from a 16th century poem about the Tower of Babel, and that it just seems sort of bizarre. Why is he quoting that at the beginning of this third installment, which then begins in a modern research university?
Oh,
and it's just a bizarre, futuristic dystopian novel, sprawling. I mean, it's the third in three, but it is about how the Tower of Babel is being built up from within the modern university and the police apparatus and the state apparatus. And again, this is Lewis writing about this in the 1940s.
Mm-hmm. Right. He was a visionary. So you have done some of the work that you study and share with your students is C.S. Lewis and
J.R.
Tolkien?
Tolkien. Yep.
Yeah.
And so
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I'd love to. So I think that they're the two most popular writers of the 20th century, I think, or they're among the most popular.
Mm-hmm.
Tolkien, when I was in Britain in 2000, was voted author of the century by a couple of popular magazines. And I mean, with reputed popular magazines, the establishment was horrified that a writer of what they called, fantasy literature would receive the accolade of the best writer of the century and not the people that they taught in English literature courses, because they weren't teaching Tolkien and they didn't teach Lewis. They would teach almost anything, but they wouldn't teach those two guys, which were enormously popular. And I could understand why they wouldn't teach somebody who was popular in their time and lost their popularity over time. But when somebody is popular in their time and their popularity grows with each successive generation, then you might want to think, this is worthy of study. And in academia, you would expect that that sort of phenomena would make it of intense interest to academics. But it's not. And by and large, you still don't see many courses on Tolkien and Lewis in academia, even though they were academics. And they're engaging with the very sorts of topics that contemporary authors like Huxley and H.G. Wells, not H.G. Wells, he's 19th century, but George Orwell, contemporaries in the 1940s. Mm-hmm. We read those stories in high school. I read 1984, Brave New World. Right. I never heard of Lewis writing about this or Tolkien writing about, and really against the backdrop of the totalitarian state, battle of good and evil, casting it in those sorts of metaphysical terms to Christians. So why is that? And I mean, the answer is probably related to the fact that they are Christians and bring a different framework into the picture to consider it. And our public schools don't want that framework to be even thought of. So I teach it as a response to science fiction, the whole genre, which is atheistic in its premises from the beginning. So that I mentioned H.G. Wells, First Men in the Moon and War of the Worlds and The Invisible Man and Island of Dr. Moreau. There's a whole list of them. I read them all when I was in primary school. I was voracious in reading that sort of fiction. It fascinated me. But it's all atheistic, and there's no God, there's no meaning and purpose. It's just these things are happening. But these men are coming in with a theistic framework and a framework of meaning and purpose. And it, to me, again, it's just like the epic I said, it opens the eyes of the students to, there's a different way of looking at this than doom, gloom, and wasn't George Orwell so prophetic in suggesting that the state would persecute people and the symbol of this would be a boot stamping on a human face forever? Wasn't he prophetic? Yes and no. He was correct in indicating that this would happen, and it did happen. What he wasn't prophetic about was that there is an alternative to this, right, which Tolkien and Lewis provide. So then it's prophetic. Then when it points to a truth that's being not recognized, then it's prophetic. Otherwise, you're just connecting dots that are pretty obvious.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And the students love it.
I bet. Sounds like a good course.
Oh, it's a great course because the material's so good. It's hard not to sound really wise and profound, and boy, I like that as well. Like, oh, I sound so smart. Like, no, yeah. the book's that good.
Yeah, right. We were watching. What were we watching? I was watching with my daughter and her husband, Lord of the Rings.
Huh?
Yeah, and Lord of the Rings, and they were outlining to me what the Christian message was in the Lord of the Rings.
There are some really good authors on that because it's not explicit in the book at all.
No.
There's no God, there's no church, there are no priests, there are no prayers, there are no angels, there's no sort of supernatural intervention per se, but it's in the background there, and it's clear that Tolkien, a very, very serious Catholic, has presented a framework that is amenable to Christianity, even though it's not explicit in it. And that you can read authors that will bring that out. And in my course, I do try to bring that out. I think this is the value I can add to your reading of this, is to show you what you're not immediately seeing, but is there. So in Frodo, you get a sort of a priestly figure, and Gandalf, you get a prophetic figure, and Aragorn, you get a kingly figure, and all three represent Christ in the sense that he's prophet, priest, and king. He's the threefold offices of Christ are represented in this character. And again, the ring will be destroyed in Mount Doom. Well, that's a sort of in it. And if you look at Tolkien's notebooks, it happens on Good Friday. That's when evil is destroyed. He dates it. It's not in the Lord of the Rings, the book, but it's in. He announces a date when it's all going to happen. And connects it with a certain chronology. The chronology is really important. The dating, as you can see in Tolkien, it talks about the time, the date, and the moons and all that. So it's very carefully, artfully constructed so that it fits with, a sense of this happened at this time in fulfillment of prophecy that is long, deep, dark in the past. And then he will connect it with again, Christian timelines and so forth. So then it starts to become more explicit and obvious. But you can read the story without that and still find it tremendously meaningful and give a sense of the dignity of human life, and that there's something, as Samwise says, something worth fighting for. There's good in this world and it's worth fighting for. Okay, great. I mean, great, stirring speech, right? But that's pervasive throughout the whole story.
Yeah, that's a great story.
Yeah.
Gollum, the figure.
Yes.
What would you say that's characterizing?
That is a good question. I actually have never answered that question.
I wonder, because he's
he's a medieval.
He's got stories in him, but he's a trickster, kind of, isn't he?
He is a trickster. There's no doubt about that. But then so is Bilbo. He out-tricks the trickster.
True. Oh, yeah. Oh, he's told he's a trickster, yeah.
Yeah, and he's tricky, and there's something about him there, in the riddles.
And he used to be a hobbit, Gollum, right? He used to be a hobbit.
Related to hobbits in some ways. That's right.
In some way. Oh, I see.
There's sort of like a ancestral, maybe a different species now, but there's this hobbit-like creature. The exact connection's not clear, but something like that. And that allows Frodo to pity him, or Bilbo to pity him, rather. So he pities this creature, and the creature probably represents Bilbo himself then. And it's the message of pitying, which points to a larger message of who else is being pitied. And the answer is Bilbo himself is being pitied by providentially designing figures that are overseeing the whole of the drama that we're reading about there. There's a divinity that shapes our ends, rough hew them though we may, says Shakespeare. There's that sense that although there's no God mentioned in the account, that things are being orchestrated. Things are happening. Things are, Aragorn's being lucky. What a lucky man he is. It's repeatedly, about how lucky. And you could say, well, it starts to become a little bit much after a while, that there's so many events happening and they just happen to happen at the same time. But then you add that there are legends that have talked about the return of the king, and well, suddenly it doesn't sound so lucky anymore. It sounds like it has been planned that this happened in a particular way. And that the moment when you took pity on that figure of Gollum, something happened which changed the whole story. And that would be an analogy for, again, I would say at that point, for how God treats us. He took pity on us and showed mercy when he deserved justice, which is he should have killed the creature that would have killed him. But he didn't. He didn't give him what he deserved. He gave him grace, if you will. And that changes the whole story. Tolkien doesn't spend much time on it, although the emphasis is so strong there that it jumps off the page. It was pity that stayed Bilbo's hand. And so eventually Frodo learns which he hates the creature, wants to kill him, but in the end he learns that it's better not to take vengeance in our own hands and just to wait.
Right.
And so he grows as a character as well, Frodo.
Yeah.
He
starts
wiser.
to discern. He makes better discernment. Yeah.
Right. And his discernment, though, is being spoken against by all the other characters, including his friend Sam, who just wants to kill him. He's going to kill you. He's going to betray you. Can you not see that? And he says, yes, I can see it. I can see it, but I'm still not going to do it. So there's a wisdom there in the folly of what he's doing. And that, again, is caught up in the cross, the wisdom in the folly of the cross.
Oh, yeah.
So that's
fascinating story, yeah? Wow.
Isn't it?
Yeah. What an author.
Yeah. And think about that. How many people does that appeal to?
Right, everyone.
It does.
Yeah.
Everyone I've ever met.
Yes, me too.
Yeah.
What about C.S. Lewis? What's your favorite book of C.S. Lewis's?
Well, it's not everyone else's. And it depends what sort of book you want, because he I think he's a great literary critic. I think he's a great apologist, Christian apologist. And I think that he's a great storyteller. Those are three different types of writing, and I think he's very good at all three. And so I have three different answers there. Okay. In terms of the storytelling, it will be a work called Till We Have Faces, which almost nobody reads. But it's Lewis's favorite book. He thinks it's his best book, and I think it is as well. So I commend people to read that. It's an extraordinary tale, and I think it's him at his best. It's beautiful. It's moving. In terms of apologetics, I don't know. I guess it's probably mere Christianity. Mm-hmm. Although I really love the short sermons that he gives, like The Weight of Glory. If you haven't read The Weight of Glory, make sure that you do. Make sure you do. It's magnificent. Mm-hmm. Sermon he gave in 1942 in the middle of the Second World War about, what the title suggests, that we don't realize how important and meaningful life is actually. We are caught up in doing small little things and thinking they're important, and we're ignoring the things that are truly important. And I won't give it away. So The Weight of Glory, I think, is a terrific one. In terms of literary criticism, I don't even know. First, I read a lot of them. The one that's not literary criticism that stands out, The Abolition of Man, is his most important work. Mm-hmm. It's his most important work in terms of engaging with the modern educational establishment and what it produces, which is the abolition of man. Not just the humane values, the moral framework of both the pagans and the Christians, but also destroying humanity is baked into the education system. That's what he's actually suggesting. When we give our lives over to the conditioners who are going to determine what human nature is themselves. And by the way, it's something that they don't think they share with us. So they do things to us which they would never do to themselves.
Yes, that's right.
Right? So like the gender reassignment surgery, right? Well, you think it's such a good idea. Why don't you do it first? Right? You start, well, I don't identify that way. Like, well, why would anyone do that or allow somebody else to do that? What makes you think what you're doing is good or allowing somebody else to do to themselves is good? Well, it's because they don't actually have concepts of good and evil in their vocabulary. They've dismissed all those things. Mm-hmm. That's the moral law. They've rejected the moral law. Well, if you do that, then there's nothing that you won't do, because the very things that would make you halt and say, I shouldn't do that, are the very categories that you say are not objectively real. And that makes you a very dangerous person that I should not trust to govern my education. And yet those are the educators, Lewis says. So it's a profound book. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it sounds like you're just talking about today, really. And what's going on in the education system and in our society. Yeah, so he delivered those lectures at my alma mater, University of Durham, in 1943, and then published them. And it sounds like he wrote them yesterday, except for a few obsolete, references to technology. Right. Talks about the wireless stuff. You have a YouTube channel. Last question, I guess. You have a YouTube channel.
I do.
I haven't looked at it yet, but how long have you had your YouTube series going on?
So I started it in 2013, but I don't think I opened it for 5 or 6 years. Right. And at the behest of my colleagues at Tyndale in the philosophy department there, they said, you should really, we're hearing from students great things about your courses, and we think that you should consider doing that yourself. And I didn't want to do it for a long time. I didn't like the sort of personality cult type thing. I don't want that, but I thought, what's the benefit though? So I can see downsides too. What's the upside? The upside is to be able to reach people with Christian integration of a sort of a Christian view of life, a worldview, if you will, with all of the humanities subjects. Are they getting that anywhere? in any university, in the school system, anywhere. And I just thought, no, they're not. And well, then you will reach people who are looking for that on YouTube, because YouTube reaches billions now. And there are a lot of moms homeschooling their children now who are looking for that sort of resource. And I found that over the course of time, I get people writing to me from all over the place. I've had people, I mean, I don't need to tell you, Jordan's got the global audience, but I've found that as well. And even professors and grad students and homeschooling moms, retired surgeons. Just about 2 weeks ago, I had a woman write me from Tel Aviv, and I won't name names. She said that she spent 41 years as a doctor looking after handicapped children, and was listening or watching my series on Homer's Odyssey. And she said, and reading it in Hebrew, the Hebrew translation, she said, I was doing something there that helped heal her soul. This ideas that I was presenting to her in a way that she found when she was healing handicapped kids' bodies, she felt like I was doing that to her by reading the books in the way I did. And I thought, that's the best feedback I've ever had. Like, because now I'm not dealing with just a young person. I'm dealing with somebody who's wise in years and experience, and saying, you're dealing with something here which is profound and it's helping me. And she said, and the context here is the bombs are falling on Tel Aviv right now. And I thought, wow, that's makes not just my day, that I will never forget that. Isn't that great?
So it's all worthwhile. So how do people find you on YouTube?
Good. I should know that, shouldn't I? I think it's Dr. Scott Masson.
Okay. That's the easiest thing.
It's the YouTube / the Dr. Scott Masson. Okay.
Well, that sounds like a fantastic thing to do.
And I've thrown a lot of lectures. So my lectures, I put them up now on YouTube.
Good. Yes. Good. And one of the things that helped Jordan when they tried to cancel him was that everything he said was already online.
You should say that again. Sorry.
That's okay. Everything that he had lectured since Harvard, since his first appointment at Harvard, he had filmed it all. And so the mob looked for something to crucify him with, and they couldn't find anything, much to their dismay.
Indeed. Yeah.
So it is good to put these things online. It's evidence of who you are.
Actually, he was an inspiration for me to do that as well. That's what colleagues indicate. And I've met Jordan a couple of times in various places, and that was definitely a consideration there as well. Yeah.
So we have this new platform, Peterson Academy.
I have heard of it. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, it just opened about a month ago. And
it's, by all accounts, going gangbusters.
I think it's going very well. We have something like 30,000 students.
That's a lot.
Or at least people who've signed up. And we're thinking that maybe you'd like to give a lecture there, if you're interested.
Sure.
Okay, so I can put you in touch with my daughter. She's the CEO of that company, and they've done a stellar job. It's so professionally done. And they'll bring an audience of 30 people to you who want to hear you.
Yeah.
And you can teach whatever you want. Your favorite lectures.
One lecture.
No, you can do more than one lecture. These are 8. They're 4 2-hour lectures to make a lecture. It's going to be 8 hours long. And you can see how it goes. And if you want to do more, do more.
Okay, we'll look into it.
Okay.
So we can
Michaela Peterson. I'll put you in touch with her.
Okay. And then
Michaela Fuller now, I guess. She's changed her name to her husband's name. Michaela Fuller.
Right. Sure. Okay, look forward to that.
Okay, thank you very much. It was really nice to meet you.
Delightful to meet you as well.
And thank you for all your information.
Not at all. Take care.
Yeah, very, very cool.
Thanks.